Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism at dmr.institute and the Mark Foster Network at Mark Foster, MARKFOSTER.net. Welcome. Today, I wanted to talk about something a bit different, but I think it's an important subject. It is something I've been researching for the last maybe 2 months. And the more I research it, the more I realize that it is a very dangerous movement. It's called the Traditionalist School. And if you haven't heard of it, well, you'll hear about it now. And I would suggest personally that if you don't know much about it yourself, that you do some reading on it. It is a rather frightening movement, started in the early 20th century in France by a guy named René Guénon, and other people followed him, and there was a split at some point between him and one of his close followers. But regardless, that movement has continued in various factions, and we'll talk about those till this day. And they have a tremendous influence in politics, in religion, including on President Trump, not directly, but indirectly through Steve Bannon. So I think it is vital that we all have an understanding of it because the traditional school is a far right ideology. It is one that most people are unaware of. Most people are aware of the threat of dominionism, a type of fundamentalist Christianity, other types of fundamentalism in Christianity, but not about the traditional school. It's something that is not really talked about that much. And I think that it really should be. And so I will attempt to correct that or begin to correct that today. And I doubt that I will finish talking about it today. Most likely, this will be a series of at least a few different episodes of my podcast discussing the traditionalist school. So let's get started. Put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to put on the screen share because I want to show you my current book, Eudaimonic Utopia, which is where I have most of the information. Um, and so I'll put that all that stuff up there for you so that you'll be able to read that for yourself. Um, okay, here we are. Hopefully you can see that as well as I can. You can see right up here the traditionalist school of esotericism. René Guénon was the founder. Fritjof Schuon, I'm probably mispronouncing his name because I know French, I don't know German. So I'm probably botching his name pretty badly. And Ananda Kumaraswamy. I should do better at Hindi and Sanskrit than that, but I don't. So that's basically the three people who are most identified with it. They are regarded as like the founders of the movement, primarily Guénon, but also those two other people had a role to play as well. And they all had slightly different orientations, and especially that split that took place between Guénon and Chouon toward the end of Guénon's life. So let me go ahead and just read for you what I have there. I am now providing a detailed discussion, including two sets of multilingual translations. I'll show those to you. I won't burden you with reading them. Of a specific far-right new religious movement. That's my area of expertise, new religious movements or NRMs. It is on the surface about as far removed from dialectical metarealism, my own theoretical perspective that I developed, and Bhaskarian critical realism, the critical realism of the late philosopher Roy Bhaskar, as anything that I could imagine. Studying the traditional school of esotericism in depth for considerably longer than I had intended at the outset has been an interesting journey. Since beginning my research, I have concluded that the process of underlaboring that school of thought would likely prove to be extremely challenging for just about anyone Hopefully, some will be so inclined. My personal reflections are also included. Let me briefly stop there to talk about underlaboring. Um, that is a concept that was adopted by Roy Bhaskar, the founder of critical realism. And what he meant by that is finding all the garbage in anything you study, whether it's a theory, whether it's a philosophy, anything. Finding the garbage, the rubbish. Um, and he got it from Thomas Locke. That's the person who originated the idea, but he developed it in his own way. And so he said, well, use critical realism as a standard for underlaboring things. That's what he did. He underlabored basically everything. And so underlaboring basically means that you try to perfect something by finding garbage in it and throwing it out. And so you get a more refined version of the thing that you started out with originally. That's underlaboring. I think it's a very, very good methodology. And Roy developed it in a way which is very, very useful, at least to me. I have found it useful in my personal life and in my academic life as well. I have, for as long as I can remember, disliked tradition and traditionalism. Nevertheless, even as a tolerant anti-traditionalist, I must be a glutton for punishment. I've kind of gotten into using these emojis so you can see some of the humorous ones I think that I put up there. Um, a guy with fright in his face with a gun. Actually, it's a water gun, but it's a gun pointed at him. A guy with a bandage on his head with a hatchet, I guess, about ready to whack him again. A guy who was frightened because there's a boomerang hovering over him, and a skull because there's a bomb that is right next to him. Although I am a Maoist third worldist and a Bhaskarian critical realist, I am also a sociologist of religion. My interest in the traditionalist school, an almost exclusively right-wing tendency, is academic, not personal. I have no personal interest in it. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. I think it is reprehensible and dangerous. Indeed, actually joining most of the religious movements and organizations which I have studied over the years, aside from the purposes of participant observation or ethnography, is inconceivable. The idea behind participant observation or ethnography is that you go into a place as an observer and you try to take part as much as you can in the activities that other people are engaged in. So, for example, a lot of my research has been on Pentecostalism. So I would go into Pentecostal churches and I would do basic things that other people were doing. Now, there were some things that I wouldn't do generally, like speaking in tongues, although there was one exception to that, because I actually took a class in speaking in tongues. And at the end of the class, we all spoke in tongues. But generally speaking, I would not do something like that because I think it would be impolite. But that was not impolite because I had taken the course along with everyone else. And it's pretty simple speaking in tongues, doesn't require much effort, pretty much automatic. Basically, it's making a lot of gibberish sounds. But in any event, you immerse yourself in a place, and the idea is that by participating, not simply observing as a neutral bystander, you have a much better chance of understanding where people are coming from. If I go into a place and I'm just sitting in the background taking notes, then I really don't have any way of identifying with the people I'm studying. The idea is that you want to identify with people. You want to become one of them, briefly, to a degree. You don't want to completely lose your identity. You want to maintain your identity as a researcher, but you want to experience a bit of what they experience. So it's a kind of what one sociologist called sympathetic introspection. It's a kind of empathy, but it's more intellectual than emotional. So I guess sympathetic introspection, probably a better term for it than empathy, although I guess there's some empathy involved in it as well. At least I've found that empathy has been useful to me. So that's basically what ethnography or participant observation refers to. Despite occupying a different philosophical universe from that school of thought, meaning the movement of the traditionalist school, and more importantly, its members, I appreciated many of my online engagements, and I have. I have, over the decades, gradually cultivated a finely tuned faculty of broad mindedness. That faculty, which I strongly recommend, has served me quite well, both academically and personally, throughout my life. Good to be open minded and broad minded. Bad to be closed minded. You don't learn anything by being closed minded. In other words, even if you don't agree with something, you maintain an attitude of open mindedness, so you learn from people. There's always something that you can learn. Even if you disagree with people on most things, you can still learn something from everyone. That's the basic attitude that I try to cultivate in my own life. Now, here's where I get into the more specific aspects of what traditionalism is. Doctrinally, the anti-modern, also known as reactionary, primitivist, or far-right traditionalist school, is an occult, a non-dual, a monistic, and an ontologically idealist perennial philosophy of supposedly authentic religions from the distant past. I'll go back and explain what each of those terms refers to. Anti-modern. People who are traditionalists generally see the modern world as in a state of decline. And for that reason, they basically worship the past. They desire to go back to the past. Most of the traditionalists, initially, including Guénon and Chouon, became Sufi Muslims because to them, that was the most recent stage of this supposed tradition which has existed throughout history. And so they immersed themselves in Islam, in Sufi Islam, and practiced the rituals of Sufi Islam and became Sufis as well, meaning getting involved in the more mystical aspects of Islam as well. So that's basically the anti-modern part. They're opposed to modernity. They want to go back to the ancient world, or at least the medieval world. They think that modernity is falling apart, that it is only a matter of time before the modern world collapses. Kind of pessimistic, I guess. Um, Now, next term, um, reactionary. Well, reactionary kind of similar. A reactionary is somebody who wants to live in the past. Basically, it's somebody who is reacting to certain aspects of the modern world, and their response is, well, let's go back to an earlier time, like Guénon does and like Chouon does. That's basically being a reactionary. A primitivist, I got that, maybe unfairly, you could argue unfairly, from this thing called anarcho-primitivism. Although anarcho-primitivism is generally seen as a kind of left-wing form of anarchism, I would argue that it has many right-wing characteristics. If you reject the modern world and you want to go back to a more primitive time, then how is that leftist? It's not leftist to me. Maybe to some people it is. Now, have I ever known anybody who was an anarcho-primitivist? Not as far as I know. Maybe I did, and I just didn't tell me. But oftentimes these people will want to live in the wilderness, in a remote area, sometimes off the grid, so to speak, and live as simply as they possibly can. And so I made a parallel there between, I think, the anarcho-primitivists and the members of the traditionalist school. Whether it's fair or not, you can judge for yourself. Far right, obviously, it is far right. A cult, a cult basically means hidden. Um, it can have a variety of different connotations. It can mean psychic, like it can refer to the paranormal. It can refer to divination like astrology. In this case, it doesn't necessarily refer to those things, but it can. There have been occultists who have become traditionalists, although Guénon himself was not precisely an occultist in that sense. But he was interested in the occult in terms of the esoteric, meaning the hidden aspects of religion. He felt that there was a need to be both esoteric and exoteric. Esoteric meaning focusing on the inward aspects of what he called tradition, exoteric meaning also practicing the external aspects of a particular tradition as well. So being a devout Muslim, and Guénon became a devout Muslim, a devout Sunni Muslim. Non-dual, non-duality can be rooted, one could say, in Neoplatonism, the Neoplatonism of Plotinus. You can also find it in Advaita Vedanta. The word Advaita in Sanskrit literally means not two, or you could say non-dual, but literally means not two. A is not, and Dvaita is two. So it's basically a belief that there is only one substance in the universe, and that substance is basically assumed to be ideas. There's only one thing in the world, and that's ideas. Everything is mental. There is nothing else. We are all a part of one another. There is no real separation between you and I. Any separation I may think exists is really only imaginary. Next, monistic, kind of similar to non-dual, but not exactly the same. A monist is somebody who says that there is literally only one thing in the universe, only one substance. So it kind of overlaps with non-dualism, but the focus is specifically on the content of existence. There's only one substance, whatever that substance is. It could be matter, could be spirit, could be something else. In this case, it is spirit. So to people who are traditionalists, there is only spirit. Everything that exists in the universe is spirit. And so people who turn to traditionalism, who say become Hindus, generally become Advaita Vedantists, because Advaita Vedanta is a kind of non-dual Hinduism. And ontologically idealist. Ontological idealism is the belief that everything is ideas. Goes back to Plato. Plato's concept of ideal forms. To Plato, there is this world of ideal forms. Ideal forms that exist in a world that is kind of remote from us, and everything that we see around us is a manifestation or an expression of that realm of ideal forms. We can't see that realm, but the realm exists, and we ourselves are emanations or manifestations of that realm. Somehow the realm is there, but we can't see it. And so consequently, the only thing that exists is ideas. There is no reality. Material reality does not exist. Materiality is simply an expression of mind. You see a lot of this in the New Thought movement, religious science, science of mind, divine science, to a lesser extent, Christian science, the concept of a universal mind. Everything is an expression of this universal mind. There's only one universal mind, and we are all manifestations of that universal mind. That is an example of ontological idealism. There's also epistemological idealism, which is different than ontological idealism. Okay, that triumphalistic perspective, okay, I need to go back and explain these terms. Triumphalism is the belief that what I say is absolutely true. And if you disagree with me, sorry, you're wrong, because I know the truth. And if you disagree with me, well, you shouldn't. Maybe you'll go to hell for it, but you really don't have a grasp on reality, because I do. And so my religion, my belief system will ultimately triumph at the end. Yours will not. I will go to heaven, maybe, and you will go to hell, maybe. That's triumphalism. But you can have triumphalism in politics as well. People who are triumphalistic about being Republicans or Democrats in the United States, or being Tories or Labour Party in the UK or whatever. Um, People can be triumphalistic pretty much about anything, whether it's about religion, spirituality, politics, rhetoric, or anything else, philosophy. That is what it means to be a triumphalist. I am not a triumphalist. I don't believe in triumphalism. I try to stay as far away from that as I can, always have. Okay, it should be clearly distinguished from the perennial philosophies of, and I name a series of individuals, these are not traditionalists. And so there are people who use the term perennial philosophy, most notably Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. He was not a traditionalist, but he believed that there was a perennial philosophy. There was a kind of eternal philosophy, but did not believe that somehow there were these traditions and that you needed to find a tradition. And within certain religions, there's only one tradition, and that tradition is true. Who knows what it is? I have no idea. Somebody obviously is in touch with the reality of things and is able to say this tradition is right, that tradition is wrong. I have no idea how people would make that kind of determination, but that's basically that's what a traditionalist would say. Perennial philosophers do not necessarily go along with that. Certainly, Aldous Huxley did not. Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, did not have that idea either. Neither did the other people that are mentioned in that list. Among the traditionalists to be considered below, some may have influenced or perhaps even dominated the interdisciplinary field of religious studies, but chiefly its specialties of comparative religion and Islamic studies. The intriguing oddity and striking peculiarity observed among many traditionalist scholars, especially their conflation of genuine evidence with little more than fantastical imagination and magical thinking, may partially explain my initial attraction so many years ago, so many decades ago, really, to the sociology of religion. It too is a branch of religious studies. Fortunately, I will say fortunately, I never encountered any traditionalists in academia uh, throughout my career. In my 40 plus years as a professor, now retired, I never had any dealings with any traditionalists on the job. I did know one person who was a traditionalist who no longer is. He's now turned against it. Fortunately, I admire him for that. I'm not going to reveal his identity, I have a lot of respect for him. I've always respected him. He's a good guy, and I admire him a great deal. But regardless, he was one. Fortunately, he no longer is. He recognized the error of his ways, I guess, and has now become an opponent of traditionalism. But still, traditionalism is growing, especially on the far right. Steve Bannon is one notable example in the United States, one of the major advisors, at least in the past, to Donald Trump. And still, he has some influence, presumably, on Trump. He has this podcast regularly, and I've listened to parts of his podcasts, and I can tell the influence of traditionalism on him. He is a traditionalist. He calls himself one, especially influenced by René Guénon and Julius Evola. Julius Evola was a member of the Italian Fascist Party. He is what is known as a radical traditionalist. Some of the more moderate traditionalists don't even accept radical traditionalists as traditionalists, but that's something for them to work out among themselves. I don't make that kind of judgment. Okay. Um, Here are some translations. As I said, I'm not going to go through them. You can look at it yourself. If you go to this book, which is at tendency.dmr.institute, tendency.dmr.institute. You can find this book, and in the book there are all these listings of related to the traditionalist school. Okay, I love translation work. I've always loved translation work, but I've gotten better at it. The first language I knew other than English was Hebrew. Later, I taught myself how to read Koine Greek, Biblical Greek. And after that, I started learning all these other languages to an extent. I can't speak in them. I'm not fluent in any of them, but I know them enough to translate basically, some better than others. Arabic and Persian better than others. Hebrew probably even better than Arabic and Persian. Okay, considerably more species of the traditional school have evolved than I originally thought. However, a tradition is the product of human history, not of divine revelation. Tradition is, moreover, entirely a social construction, and in contrast to the frequently stated views of many traditionalists, should never be reified, meaning you don't take something that is a subjective concept and make it real and treat it as if it is a real thing. That's reification, where you take something that is simply an idea and you turn it into a real thing. I would argue that traditionalists do that. Tradition is not a thing. There is no such thing as tradition. Tradition is a social construction, and yet traditionalists have taken tradition and turned it into a real thing without any evidence, in my opinion, for doing that. Um, Traditionalism should not be regarded as intrinsically fascistic. That notwithstanding, its compatibility with fascism, as demonstrated by the person I just mentioned, the Italian fascist cum traditionalist Julius Evola and others, is fortunately obvious to any careful reader. Evola is even today a heroic figure to some traditionalists, and an unbroken chain of tradition to an authentic revelation discussed by Walter, quote unquote, Lord Northbourne, James, is dubious and unverifiable. I put their titles in quotes to indicate my uh, lack of respect for royal titles. A parallel may be drawn to the historically unsupportable notion based upon the Talmud of the oral law. And so here's that parallel that I draw. It's a very interesting parallel, in my opinion. Rabbinic Judaism's, meaning Orthodox Judaism's, oral law is predicated upon an unbroken chain of tradition or transmission. The Talmud, taken as a justification for Zionist colonialism, and if you've been watching me, you know that I am no fan of Zionism as a Bundist, is a record of that chain. That notwithstanding, when reading the volumes of the Talmud, one instead encounters debates between rabbis on Middle European ghettos, not the consistent line of thought which might suggest some unbroken chain of transmission. The academic field of oral history promotes the systematic utilization of established historical methods. However, the unbroken chain of tradition in Orthodox Judaism is apologetics, meaning it's trying to defend your religion. It's not even theology. It's trying to say, my religion is true, and here's why. I'll show you evidence why it's true. That's not theology. That's apologetics. Many indigenous peoples have rich oral histories. The fact that they are currently being seriously examined by professional historians is a relatively recent phenomenon. Such oral histories were previously disregarded as mythologies, comparable to those out of ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt. Got the order mixed up, but you got the idea. Consequently, disregarding any special pleadings to the contrary, special pleading is a logical fallacy, the presumed unbroken chain of tradition should not be conflated with legitimate oral histories. It's not oral history. By confounding or confusing one with the other, an individual is, whether inadvertently or otherwise, disrespecting the long overlooked cultures of Earth's indigenous peoples. I will end it right there. Let me go back to where I am and bring this thing back so I can come back here. Give me a second here. Okay, there I am. I will end that right now and continue with the stuff at some future time, most likely Within the next week or so, I'll do another episode on it. I'm sorry I haven't been absent for a while. I've been working on this. I've had other things to deal with, including my own autism, which has its ups and downs. My autism is not consistent. I have periods where I want to hide myself from the world. I have had an episode like that recently, but I'm better now, I think, somewhat. At least I feel willing to go out and make these podcasts again. Although I still am pretty much staying away from other people. I have a neighbor who wants to talk with me, and I talk with him as much as I can, but I have difficulty doing it because of my autism. And I'm sorry to him, but that's just me. That's my own problem, not his. So for the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., saying, "We are Bund. We are Bund. We are Bund." Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.